Welcome to the Lumicast, your premier gateway to the universe of limitless photo editing. Dive into the galaxy of Luminar software and the dynamic world of AI photo editing. Join us weekly for a burst of creativity and the drive to transform your photos with confidence and skill. Broadcasting directly from Clever Photographer headquarters, it's time to welcome your hosts, Jacob Bors and Holly Linton.
Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of Lumicast, our podcast covering photography, photo editing, and of course our beloved Luminar Neo. We are back, me, Jacob Bors, and Holly Linton next to me. Hello, Holly.
Hi, Jacob. How are you today?
I'm super excited about today's topic, which will be...
We're talking about the exciting export settings in Luminar Neo. And this is going to include a bunch of things, different types of file formats, including JPEGs, PNGs, TIFF, and more. We have color spaces like sRGB, Adobe RGB, resolution, different values of that, and in what cases you would use certain resolutions. We're going to talk about bit depth, TIFF compression options, and then some quick export recipes.
That should be lots of fun for people who are interested in it, isn't it? Do you do much exporting, Holly?
I do. I export after every image that I edit. I make sure I export it right away because I don't want to have a whole bunch of images and then not remember, did I export that? Didn't I export it? So my routine is just literally always export it once I'm done editing it, rename it, put it back in the folder in which it came from. And that's what I do. And I guess we can talk more about that later.
Yes. So is that how you keep them organized? Do you have like a folders based by dates or maybe by occasion or event or?
Pretty much by subject. So for example, I have a nature folder and then a subfolder of flowers, and then another subfolder of the location where I shot, say Longwood Gardens, for example. And then I'll export my final image back into the Longwood Gardens folder. And I make a new folder called Finished Edits. And I always put all the finished ones in that folder so that somewhere in time where I might want to just review all of my edited pictures, I can easily identify that those are just the ones that are edited and completed. Otherwise, I'd be like sifting through my entire, nature folder to find these, edited ones. So I think that's a good way of condensing all of your, finished product. That's how I do it.
Definitely. That's a very good system. Excellent. Well, when it comes to organizing the images, we can actually talk about that probably in another class on another podcast episode, because that is whole topic on itself, how to keep your images organized. Because one thing is to organize few hundred photos. Another thing is to organize hundreds of thousands of photos. Then it comes to, some people maybe like Holly have one massive hard drive, but some others maybe have multiple little hard drives. And it can be a really complex topic, which we will not be able to cover today, but we will be looking at the exporting task itself. So starting with the exporting, when you go into Luminar Neo, as probably most of you know, the easiest way to export the image is just to right click on the image and select export. I think the shortcut is also Shift Command E or Shift Control E. Now with the latest updates, remember in editing module, you can also go to the top right corner where there is the exporting button. And when you click on that, now you can select, of course, the new export, which will bring you again to that exporting window. But you can also select the export with previous, which will allow you to export the image in exactly the same format as you exported your last photo. And it has 4 quick export shortcuts. You can export very quickly JPEG with 100% quality, JPEG with 80% quality, and TIFF with 16 bits and 8 bits. Now, if you're not sure about the quality and bits, now you're going to learn about that. All right, so let's imagine that we have clicked on the new export, and we are in that first exporting window. What you do usually, you select where you're going to save your image, as Holly mentioned. You're going to name it, and that's the easy part done. Now it's time to set up the format or exporting format. So all the way on the top is the format, with number of file formats you can choose. So we're going to start with that. Holly, what are the different formats there?
All right, well, we have JPEG, which everyone's probably very familiar with.
Mm-hmm.
And we have PNGs, TIFFs, JPEG 2000, which I'm actually not familiar with, PSD, PDFs, and DNGs.
Cool. So yes, let's start from the top. So JPEG, that's probably the most common format out there, right? For some reason, it also has a very bad rep, I would say. Some people really think that JPEG is something awful to use. But JPEG is actually a very cool format, which you can definitely use for exporting. And the key here is, so how does it work? JPEG is a lossy format. So if you save your image in a JPEG format, and then you go and edit it and save it again, it will again lose a little bit of data. And when you save it again, it will lose data and so on, so on. So if it's like a 6th or 7th version along the way from your original RAW file, that JPEG will be terrible quality. But if you have a RAW file, which you have just edited, and you export image in a JPEG format with 100% quality and in the best possible resolution, actually the file will be perfectly fine for printing or for social media or for your website. So JPEG is perfectly good format to use in today's photography. Interestingly, because I was born in 1986, JPEG was also created in 1986 by a group of developers as they were looking for a format for images which they can use to share their photos. I guess following on that, interestingly, there is also the JPEG 2000, which was created by exactly the same people to celebrate the year 2000. So it was actually created in year 2000, and it was supposed to be like a newer or better quality of JPEGs. You can optionally create JPEG 2000 without the loss of quality, and it is a little bit easier to read. However, for some reason, through the history, the JPEG 2000 just haven't really made it. It's not very popular. I personally don't know anybody who use it. It was just a try. They tried it and it didn't catch on. And the JPEG pretty much lives on. So that's the JPEG and JPEG 2000. What do you export your images mostly in?
I export mine as JPEGs. Mm-hmm. And unless if I did a background removal, I might save it as a PNG so that I could, and then I have a little folder called like Objects by Holly Linden. And I save all my little cutouts as a PNG so that I could use them easily as an overlay. Yeah, otherwise, generally, it's always just going to be a JPEG. I always do the full file size at 100% quality because I like to just keep like the best quality on my external drive. And if I ever need to resize anything, I do that after the fact on my desktop, like to share it to social media. I'll make the file size smaller to share it with a copy of the picture. And then after I share it, I drag that picture into the trash can so that I don't have all different types of sizes on my external drive. I just like to keep the perfect, best copy on there. But that's just my preference. So
great. PNGs, that brings us nicely to it.
Mm-hmm.
Talking about the years, somehow I also know that the PNG was actually created in 1995. And it was supposed to be a replacement for file format called GIF. Do you remember GIF?
Yes.
It was mostly used for these animated little images. But GIF actually had a copyright attached to it, and the format wasn't open for, for photographers or artists out there. So they initially thought, okay, we're going to create this PNG and we're going to use it for that. But it kind of strayed away for it. And now it's, I think, universally used image format for images that have a transparent background, as you mentioned already. I think for that, it's perfect. And also is compared to JPEG, it's actually lossless image format. So it means that it doesn't matter how many times you save it, it will never lose the quality. So for that, it's great. However, comparing to JPEG, the PNG, generally the files are much bigger. So where the JPEG standard quality could be maybe like 10 or 15 megabytes, the same size in PNG could be 30, 40, 50, 60 megabytes. So that's just the main difference between the two. But talking about the practical use in Luminar Neo, exactly as Holly mentioned, JPEG for most of the standard exporting, where you can adjust the quality. We're going to talk about that in a moment. And PNG is a great format for exporting images with transparent background when we need to reuse them or save them as overlays and so on. Now, moving to TIFF. TIFF, until very recently, was the highest quality of the file in Luminar Neo. And if you've seen any of my classes, like the photo manipulation class, we have used TIFFs over and over. And not only that, Skylum or Luminar itself used TIFF file as a main formatting format. You can see TIFF files, for example, with the HDR merge. When you merge files together, the result or completed file is in TIFF format. Panorama stitching, same thing. All the generative tools. Once you create these images, they are all in very high quality TIFF format. So it's basically just very, very good file format, which again is lossless. It doesn't lose any quality. It supports 8 and 16 bits, and not in Luminar Neo because the layers work a little bit differently. But for example, in Photoshop and other software, for photo editing software, it can also save the layers which are in the image. So that is pretty cool. We talk about the JPEG 2000. PSD, just very quickly, is a Photoshop format. So you can save in Photoshop format in PSD, but generally, I don't really see much of a use here unless you're going to be moving the image straight into Photoshop and continue from there. But I think there are easier and smarter way to do that. And I think the PSD is a little bit of a legacy format, which is still in Luminar, but I think it's going back to Luminar 3 or Luminar 4 when the workflow was a little bit different. PDF, everybody knows, is the standard sharing kind of document kind of format, which again, for sharing images is not the one I would go for. And finally, the most recent addition of our format is the DNG, which is basically digital format created by Adobe. It's like a raw format. It's a digital negative. And this format is great for archiving your images. So let's say that you have like 100 raw files and you want to archive them somewhere or keep them somewhere in the fullest quality possible, and you would share or export your images in the DNG format.
And also, aren't iPhone RAW pictures DNG? They have that. They're a DNG file also.
They are DNG files as well. Great. Yes. So it ultimately is a great format, the DNG. Once you choose it, you will notice that there are actually no additional settings you can choose in the application. So you just click on format DNG and there is nothing else you can set up, simply because it will just keep all the raw data and everything that is in the image already. So there's nothing to adjust. It will take your raw photo and it will just transfer it to this format and keep it all there. So JPEGs, PNGs, TIFFs, JPEGs 2000, PSD, PDF, and DNG. So that's for that. What's next on our list? Or you have something else to add?
Well, I have one thing to add. I wonder if our listeners know what JPEG stands for.
Tell me.
Let's see if I remember it from my studies. Does it stand for Joint Photographers Expert Group?
That's it. Well done.
Okay.
And that's the same group who also created the JPEG 2000.
Mm-hmm.
Well done. Okay.
All right.
Next on our list.
Next up is color space, which I don't know a whole lot about it. I always just use the sRGB when I export in Luminar Neo. I know you'll be the expert on these other two, but tell us a little bit about what the color space even means.
Great. So color space, I guess in a way it would be easier for photographers to understand when I say camera profiles, because it works very similarly. It's basically a profile, or it's a way to explain the colors in a way. Basically, so you again edited your image and you're about to export it and you want to showcase it to other people on their screens or maybe print it, and you need to tell these spaces how the image is going to look, how the gray is going to look, how the red is going to look, what kind of shades it's going to have. And these spaces basically help to translate or showcase the image itself. So it's very similar to the camera profile. The only difference is that the camera profile is the kind of interpreter of these data from camera into the editing software. The color spaces are from the editing software into these files. Does it make sense?
Yeah.
In a way, great. So obviously choosing the right color space is very important. However, I think it's important to know here that the sRGB will be 99% right. So if you leave it on your sRGB, just as Holly said, you will be more than fine. It will be work. So don't worry too much about it. Yes, there are other options like the Adobe RGB or Pro Photo RGB. Now, the Adobe RGB is sometimes used, for example, for large prints. Some print shops or printers or print studios like to use that because it's maybe more compatible with their printing machines. And when it comes to the big prints, that's why you really have to be exact with, shades of greens and shades of blues. And it really has to be as realistic or as exact to what the artist wanted to create. So the Adobe RGB is good for that. Honestly, the Pro Photo RGB I have never used. I know it's supposed to be even another step of quality from the Adobe RGB, but talking around with the photographers, they actually mentioned that there is very small amount of spaces or companies who would actually accept that format because it's just not used that often. So again, I wouldn't necessarily worry too much about it. So important thing to know about the color spaces is that it's basically interpreter of the colors and of the look of the image between your editing software and your file, and that the sRGB will be perfectly fine if you stick to that.
And we talked in our last episode about printing. I don't do a lot of printing, but so for people who do, when they send it to the print company, I'm assuming they'll have like a drop-down menu or like the print company will say, select sRGB or Adobe RGB according to your wishes or whatever they use. So they'll come across that during that process of actually getting their prints done.
So how it works generally, but let's say you come to a website where you're going to print it, like a white wall printer or like these big, established print companies. You upload the image and they basically download all the data about it. It immediately shows you which color space you have, what resolution, what size, and so on. And if any of the details, like the image details, will not be compatible or they will like to change, they will let you know there. So if it maybe isn't compatible, then you have to go back to your software and export it again in that format. But as I say, 99% of the time, the sRGB will be fine there. The Adobe RGB generally is really used more for, bigger prints. We're talking like billboards, or we're talking like a 2 meters on 5 meters prints and stuff like that, where again, is really important that even the littlest shades are exact.
Mm-hmm.
RGB should be more than enough.
Okay, interesting. All right, on to resolution. That's how many pixels are packed into each inch of our printed photographs. So would we need to know about exporting into the PPI, pixels per inch? You can choose from a bunch of different ranges, I guess would be the word, like 72 pixels per inch or all the way up to 600 or more pixels per inch. So how do you know which one to use when you export? I always just do 300. I don't know if that's correct or not.
And you're doing well.
So I never really changed that number. So teach us more about that.
And that's the right choice. I guess at the end, we can go through like a safe export setting. If you never touch it, you will be perfectly fine. And so far, we established that the sRGB is 1. And you just mentioned another one, 300 pixels on inch. You can't go wrong with that. Honestly, 600 pixels on each is extreme. It will only be used for, as it mentioned, fine art or scanning or really small prints where you're really looking for exact details. And I spoke to a guy from printing company in Scotland, in Glasgow, and he actually told me that their software for printing, when it gets 600 ppi, it actually automatically halves it anyway. It divided by 2. So you end up by 300 anyway, simply because their printer, the normal printer, the one which costs normal money, and I mean, normal money still means a lot anyway for us, the printer will not work with 600 ppi anyway, so it will go for the 300. So anyway, there are some numbers that you can use. So as Holly mentioned already, 72, 96, 150, 240, and 300. These are just examples. You can technically choose anything. But as the rule of thumb, 300 always for printing. Anytime you're going to print your image, 300 is what you want to have in. For anything else, then it will be question of size. So let's say some websites or social media have a limit on size of your file. So maybe like 20 megabytes or 10 megabytes. So I'm thinking about Lumibot. Lumibot only accepts images up to 20 megabytes. So if you want a smaller megabytes, maybe you have to adjust the PPI. I personally use 150 ppi for my website. So anytime I export image, I export it in all the highest quality and the resolution on 150. Just because it makes the image a little bit smaller and then it's easier and faster to load it. That's all. So just to kind of give you a quick idea, 72 ppi is good for website or for your screen. 96 ppi is often used for websites. 150 ppi can be used on screens, but it can be used for prints as well. And then 300 ppi, as I say, is always safe bet when it comes to printing. So yeah, that's it for the resolution. What we have next?
All right. Interesting. Okay. Bit depth. Okay.
So again, rule of thumb here. First, okay, let's go back to the fact that the depth can be set on only certain file formats in Luminar Neo and in generally. So for example, JPEG doesn't actually have the settings. PNG has and TIFF has. So only TIFF and PNG has the option to adjust the depth. So we talk about safe settings, right? We talk about sRGB. Now we know 300 pixels per inch. So 16 bits is another great safe setting when it comes to that. What it basically means, so let's have a look at the difference. If you use the 8 bits, looking at our quick cheat sheet, is that basically it includes about 256 tones per channel. Or if you choose the 16 bits, it has over 65,000 tones per channel. So it's a massive improvement in the quality. And where you're going to really see the difference are the gradients. So imagine you have like a really nice sunset, which starts from the blue on the top and it ends around gold in your horizon. So obviously it goes from that blue through gradient all the way to the golden. With 8-bit, sometimes you will see a little bit of the artifacts between the different colors. Sometimes it almost looks like lines, actually, if you really zoom in. It looks very strange and not very natural. When you export it in 16 bits, that will disappear. It will be nice, smooth gradient. And it's basically to do with how much data that specific one pixel can hold. And as you can hold more, it has more possibilities to create the gradient or create different shades. Does it make sense a little bit?
So even though it's twice the amount of bits, so 8 times 2 is 16, but it has way more than twice the amount of tones. So I find that interesting mathematics.
It's a little bit like a palette, right? Yeah. It's a little bit like a palette. If I give you just a set of 6 crayons, there is a certain amount of colors you can do with it. If I give you 24, even, or maybe 12, let's say 12, so to do the double, with 12 crayons, with 12 more colors, or 6 more colors, you will be able to make much more.
Because you can mix them together. Okay, I get it.
Exactly.
All right. On to TIFF compression options. So compression reduces our file size, and in the TIFF format, all the options are lossless. No image quality is lost. So what is that? You kind of talked about that already, but tell us a little bit more about TIFF compression.
Coming back to our formats, obviously this one is specific for TIFF. And again, we have in our mind that we're using TIFF to export our images in the highest possible quality, right? So because it has the highest possible quality when it comes to your depth and when it comes to your resolution, there is so much data. So these folders can be, or these images can be massive. One example, I was just merging an HDR file in Luminar Neo, and the file was like 300 megabytes, which is mad. That's crazy, 300 megabytes per image. If you then have, like, if you're interior design photographer, you could end up with terabytes and terabytes or gigabytes and gigabytes of photos from one shoot. So the way to work with that, you can use something that is called compression. And basically, as Holly mentioned already, the compression is still lossless, so you're not losing any data, but it helps to adjust the size of the file. Now, there are 2 options, LZW and PAC bits, but actually, talking about the safe option, the LZW is the one you should go with. The PAC bits is like a legacy format. It's been disused for quite some time now, and I know the option is still there, but you will be safer with the LZW simply because it's just a really good, best all-around compression option. Now, whenever I talk about get the image in the highest possible quality, I actually go for no compression at all, simply because I think if that's what you're really looking for, if you're looking for the highest quality, don't apply the compression. But if somebody is exporting 100 images, then I understand maybe this is a good option to have on.
Well, I've never had to compress a TIFF, and I don't plan to. I'll just keep it simple that way.
Good. But it's good to know what it's about. And basically, you're not losing quality by applying it. You're losing the image size. So again, as I say, if, like maybe you're working on a laptop or maybe, storage space could be an issue, then this is a good option to have. Is that all our options?
Well, that's all our options. Now we have some recipes for quick exporting. So depending on what task you're doing, if you're sharing to social media or you're going to go to print, maybe delivering pictures to a client, there are different suggested sizes and formats to use. You can tell us about all those, but I'll throw in what I do on social media. Somewhere along the way, I was told to shrink your long edge to 2048 pixels because that's what Facebook technically, like that's their standard or something. So that's kind of what I do when I share it on social media. I don't know if that's right or wrong, but what could you say about all these? Give us these recipes.
Good. Okay. So different, I guess, quick exporting recipes. They are not like your law book or anything. You don't have to go by it, but it's a good starting point, I guess. So social media and web is a good one to start with because I think following the last episode or the episode before, Yeah, I think that's the last episode where we talk about what to do with your images once you're done with them. Obviously, sharing them online is one of the ways you can share your art. So the format, as I mentioned at the beginning, JPEG is perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with that. I think you should go with high quality JPEG. The color space, as I mentioned, RGB will be perfectly fine. Now, resolution-wise, around 100 on PPI will be fine, so you can go for that 72 or 96. And actually, when it comes to the compression, generally between 80 or 90% of the quality will be fine as well. Now, what you don't know is that regardless if you apply the compression or not, the platform will probably do it anyway. It's not as visible on Facebook, I think, but on Instagram, you can really see it. You can really see how the image can get damaged, especially if you apply any of their internal editing tools. So what people sometimes do, they edit their image and they work on it for hours, and then they jump in and they just increase maybe exposure or something with their slider. And they don't realize it's a little bit like Luminar Neo coming from RAW into the JPEG. The moment you use any of their tool, they apply compression and you editing and removing the quality. It's like saving JPEG again and again and again, So try to avoid it. Try to get it as good as possible before you share it on the platforms, because if you use their tools, talking about Instagram specifically, you will lose a little bit of quality. JPEG sRGB around 100 PPI no resolution, and anywhere between 80 or 90% of the quality will be fine. Talking about printing, and we're talking about standard printing, no large prints. We're talking like maybe like A3, A2, A1 sizes or A4. In that case, JPEG or TIFF will be fine. TIFF in general is the way to go. RGB will be fine here. Go for the 16 bits on the depth because you want to keep as much quality there. As I mentioned, anytime you're exporting your images for printing, go for the 300 PPI there and try the compression. I know that Holly is against it, but I think that LZW, if you apply that, it will make the file a little bit smaller. And knowing that some online printing companies have an actual size limit on how big this file can be, maybe this will help you to make it a little bit smaller. Now, talking about archiving, or you can go for the PNG format, then there is nothing to set and you will basically just be saving a raw file again in that Adobe format. Or you can go for the highest possible TIFF, as we already mentioned with Holly. So yes, TIFF file, sRGB again, 16 bits, 300 PPI. I wouldn't go for no compression at all. Let's just go for the highest possible quality. Now we talk about the transparent overlays or transparent images with Holly earlier. So what would be the setting there?
For a PNG, well, that would be a PNG setting.
That's it.
And then, 8-bit. Do you get a choice of 16-bit with a transparency?
You do get a 16 bits, maybe 6. Depends.
So
depends on the overlay, I guess. You could go 8 or 16.
Okay, wouldn't matter.
Not much.
All right. And the resolution 300 pixels per inch for a PNG.
That's it.
Because you're going to use that as the layer. So you want that to be at a good resolution.
100%. And again, if you're going to be placing it on 16-bit image, you want it in 16-bit format as well, right? Because you want them to match together. And that's pretty much it. I guess a client delivery, if you're working on a project for your clients. As a preview, you can go for normal size JPEG, just like for the website. So again, JPEG sRGB, maybe go for higher resolution, 150 to 300 PPI, and around that 85 to 90% quality. And if you're going for the final delivery and you want to give them format which they able to actually work with, then I would go for the highest possible JPEG, which would be, as we mentioned at the beginning, JPEG format, RGB, 300 PPI on resolution, and 100% quality.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's not a glamorous topic, but it's important to know all these things for sure.
Definitely. So can we now establish the safest option? If you never touch it, you'll be fine with it. What would be the format? So if you're just exporting your image to share it around.
I'm in Luminar Neo. I would hit the export button and I would go to, let me just pretend right now. I'd go to new export.
That's it.
And let's see what comes up. It's going to give me my existing file name, which I'm going to then I usually keep the file number at the end. I think that's important to always keep your file numbers, but I'll just name it, say red flower image -31 or whatever. And then the format, I pick JPEG. For the resize, I pick original so that it's full size. Sharpening, I put none because you told us to do that. Color space, sRGB. Now, my resolution, because I got a new mirrorless camera, it defaults at 350 pixels per inch. Is that something that I should switch to 300?
Not necessarily. If it's 350, I would leave it.
All right. And then quality, I leave it at 100. And then I click save. And that's how I would do it.
Cool. So I guess finishing it on the specific Luminar Neo exporting window, we haven't mentioned the safe transparency. So that's one option you can check on if you're exporting TIFFs and PNGs, right? So that would be the way to export the transparent image. And the second thing we didn't talk about, or we haven't talked about the sharpen option, but Holly mentioned, right, don't use it, because the reason is that if you want to add sharpening to your image, you want to do it in the amount that you feel is right. While you can choose option between none, low, medium, and height in the drop-down box there, you don't really know what it means. You don't know if it's like 40% or 60% or 80% or how much is it. So if you want to sharpen your image, for example, for large prints, do it during the editing, zoom into that 100%, double check that everything is sharp, and have full control over it. So I never use the sharpen option there, so keep it on none. All right, Holly.
And I have one more thing. When you save it as a PNG, usually you click save transparency if you want to use it as an overlay. Is there a case where you would uncheck or where you would not check off save transparency?
That's a good question. If the image has no transparency at all, it's not really a big deal. Even if you click on save transparency, there will just not be transparent area. However, let's say that you remove a background from portrait and you don't want it transparent. If you don't click on it, the background will be just black. So that would be an option. But
okay, great.
Okay, well, Holly, have you learned something new?
I have.
Good. Okay, folks, that's it for today's episode. It's a shorter one, but as Holly mentioned, we felt like it was really important to go through all of this so you are a little bit more comfortable with exporting. And we will be back again next week with another interesting episode where this one, following on all our discussions, we're going to be looking at how to develop your raw image. We're going to go through the basic workflow, everything from your optics, transformation, light, black and whites, color, noise reduction, sharpening, and so much more. If you're interested in that, if you're still struggling to do your basic development, which, by the way, is the most important part of editing, then come back and listen to us, or see us, more like listen to us again next week on Friday. Folks, have a great week or weekend. Holly, thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
And see you next week.
And that's a wrap. Now, there's only 3 things left to do. Subscribe to this podcast so you never miss a future episode. Visit our website at cleverphotographer.com/Lumicast to see what we have in store next. And stay creative and keep editing your photos no matter what anyone says.